Hi, my name's Samuel Harms, and I'm an attorney in Greenville, South Carolina. And we are going to have a basic parliamentary class here this evening based on Robert's Rules of Order. And the purpose of this meeting is just to get a basic understanding of parliamentary procedure. We're not going to try and do anything fancy. And we're going to go over a lot of stuff that's very basic because, in my opinion, a lot of people, when they come to meetings, especially the political meetings that most of you attend, there's a lot of issues as far as what the proper procedure is. And a lot of times people feel either embarrassed or they're not sure of themselves, and as a response, they don't participate. So if at the end of the meeting you feel a little bit more comfortable in participating at your next political meeting, then in my mind we have succeeded in meeting one of the goals. All right? Let's just talk a little bit about Robert's Rules of Order. I have a book here, Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, 10th edition, which I believe is the latest edition. I bought this about 2 years ago. And this is all of the Robert's Rules of Order. This book, which is condensed, but I believe it has all of the rules, runs an amazing 640 pages. And we're going to get through it all tonight. Okay? But that gives you an idea of the scope of how big Robert's Rules of Order is and how many different situations it tries to address. At the end of the day, what I have seen, and I do not claim to be an expert in parliamentary procedures, and I need to start off probably sometime out front. I could very well say something wrong during this meeting, and I apologize in advance. And if any of you looking through the materials say, "Hey, wait a minute, that's not what the materials say," we're going to go with what the materials say because they were written by people who really do know what they're doing. But so Robert's Rules of Order runs 600 and some pages long. I have not read through that entire book. What I did do is read Robert's Rules in Plain English, 2nd edition, which is a fantastic book, and I would highly recommend it. It runs only about 155 pages. And it truly condenses Robert's Rules in very simple, easy to understand English and examples. And I would highly recommend Robert's Rules in Plain English, 2nd edition, by Doris Zimmerman. And I've read that book from cover to cover, and I've also read this book from cover to cover, the Everything Robert's Rules book, the Everything Robert's Rules book, by Barbara Campbell, and it too is written in very plain English. It gives more examples of how to handle situations, and if you read Robert's Rules in English, you will literally understand, I believe, 95% of all the situations that could ever arise, probably more like 90%. And the same thing with the Everything Robert's Rules books. So those are two books I highly recommend, and then of course the original, which has the official rules in there. Starting off, before we start getting to the details, which we're about to do, I want to remind everybody that in Robert's Rules and in a lot of the rules of any organizations, it says, or it implies, that the primary purpose of these rules is to allow the members to participate and make collective decisions. And when we get bogged down into a lot of these rules, I always want you to remember that there's a simple rule to follow. The members should be allowed to participate to make a collective decision. If that's not happening, then one of the Robert's Rules are usually being ignored or violated. And so while we get into a lot of details, at the end of the day, a lot of this is just your gut reaction as to what's fair. And so you can condense all these books I've shown you down into, what is fair for the organization as a whole. So let's start getting into some of the details. And first, we're going to talk about the order of business of any meeting, because that kind of gives us a big picture view of how the meeting is to be run and how Robert's Rules works through it. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on this because this is stuff that we've all seen. But if you take a look at the handout, the first handout I've given to you, and these handouts, by the way, were written by a man named Jim Slaughter, S-L-A-U-G-H-T-E-R. He has an absolutely fantastic website where I printed this material off, www.jimslaughter.com, and it's on the bottom of each one of these pages is his website. And all of these, I believe all of the materials that we're going to go through here today come from Mr. Jim Slaughter. All right, so we have the order of business. And if we take a look at the materials that we have, we see that the opening of the meeting is the first thing that needs to be done. And it says the presiding officer should never call a meeting to order until a quorum is present. Okay? A quorum is essentially the rule of the organization as to how many people do you have to have in that room, how many people do you have to have in that meeting before you can get started. Okay? Again, it goes back to an issue of fairness for the group as a whole. You don't ever want a small group of people making a decision for the group as a whole. And so in order to avoid that situation, you have quorum rules. For a lot of the political organizations, the quorum rules is 25% of the membership. Because after all, if you have less than 25% of the membership there, the rationale of the thinking is you shouldn't be having a meeting at all. Okay? Does anybody have any questions about a quorum or why quorums are important? All right, great. The next thing is the approval of minutes, all right, which is essentially in any organization you're going to have a secretary. The secretary should be taking minutes of the meetings so that there is a written record of what occurred. It's important for organizations to have written records because otherwise there could be debates months later, years later, even days later as to what actually occurred, was actually the wording of a resolution or a motion. And so the second thing we do in the meeting is approve the minute from the previous meeting. Okay, the minutes should be distributed so everyone can see them, but they don't have to be read aloud. All right. Usually the meetings are approved by kind of debate if there's no problems with them. The third thing on the order of business is the reports of officers, boards, and standing committees. It says that the first substantive item of business in meetings is to typically hear from the officers. So the officers can give a report as to what has occurred since the last meeting or what's about to occur of importance. Then we have reports are generally for information only. So if a board or a standing committee gives a report, there's no action actually needed. They're just simply informing the group as a whole what's happening with that board or committee. All right. The next thing on there is the reports of special committees on the slide. Okay. Special committees are committees that are formed for a special purpose. A good example of that is a committee for the convention. Convention is something that happens once, it gets up, it happens, it's done, it's over with. You don't need a special committee for the convention running all of the time. Compare that maybe, let's say, a finance committee with what we call a standing committee, and the standing committees exist for the whole time because you always need to be handling your finances. All right. The next item under Robert's Rules that's to be looked at or dealt with is the unfinished business. That means the unfinished business from the previous meetings. Sometimes at meetings, motions are tabled. And if a motion is tabled under Robert's Rules, that motion that was tabled is automatically brought up during the unfinished business section at the next meeting. Nobody even has to put it on agenda. This is a rule that is often violated because, as we'll learn in a few minutes, one of the strategies to kill a motion or a resolution is to table it. But you need to remember, if you're successful in doing that, if the rules are followed, it automatically comes right back up. But what you find is once something's been tabled, people forget to bring it up at the next meeting. Okay? The next thing is on the agenda is new business. All right? And this is where most of the work occurs. It's exactly what it sounds like. All the new things that the members want addressed. All right? And then last thing is the closing of the meeting, okay? Towards the end of the meeting, the presiding officer, which is the chairman of the president, says, is there any further business? All right, if there's no further business, then the meeting is adjourned. All right, so we've gone through all of the items in the order of business. Is there any questions about the order of business for a meeting under Robert's Rules? All right, great. Now, the next flyer that you have before you is entitled Handling of a Motion. And so now we're going to get most basic parliamentary procedures down. And the handling of a motion is, it should be fairly straightforward. But when you watch and you're an observer of political meetings, you will see that this most basic, simple structure is violated constantly. It's violated by the people making the motions, people who are in support of the motions, people who are opposed to the motions, but most importantly, it's violated by the presiding officer a lot. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through this entire sheet so that we understand what is the proper way to handle a motion, since it is mishandled all of the time. Under item number 1, it says bringing a motion before the assembly. 1, a member makes the motion. I move that. So for example, if you as a member of a political organization say you want $500 to be spent on television advertising on behalf of the party, you would make a motion and it would just simply say, I move that the political party spends $500 television advertising promoting the party. All right? Now notice how it says here, a member makes the motion. That's very important because you will see at political meetings all of the time, non-members making motions. All right? You will see people in executive committee meetings. I see this all the time. People who aren't a voting member of the body bringing a motion. Now, if the group as a whole wants that to happen, I'm of the opinion it's no harm, no foul. But if Robert's Rules of Orders are being followed, which they should be, because again, the purpose of the rules is to protect members, okay? Then a question arises, well, wait a minute, if somebody's not a member of an organization, why should they be able to make a motion that binds the organization? Okay? So, motions should be made by a member, they should be relatively short, and they should be fairly straightforward. All right? Number 2, another member seconds the motion. All right? The seconder does not need to be recognized. Now, the reason why a second is important is because the way Robert's Rules works is there's a belief that you at least have to have 2 people who agree with the motion. If only one person thinks a motion is important, then the rationale is it's not worth the time of the organization as a whole to discuss something that only one person wants to discuss. So seconds are important. The other thing that gets violated in a lot of the meetings that we often go to is people will make a motion and then they'll want to start talking, right? Don't we see that all the time? Well, you need to have somebody second it first so that there's at least some evidence that one other person thinks that this issue is important, okay? The third thing that's supposed to happen is the chair, the presiding officer, states the question. And here they say it's moved and seconded. That essentially what this is doing is the presiding officer should repeat exactly what the motion is. That does 2 things. Number 1, that allows everybody in the room to hear it. How often are we at meetings where somebody's making a motion, but their back is to us, and we can't hear every word that's said? The presiding officer is looking at everybody, so they should repeat it so that everybody hears it. And the second reason why that should be done is that clarifies what the motion actually is, right? How many of us have been to a meeting where a motion is made and we're not actually sure what was being said, right? So if the presiding officer repeats it, people can hear it, and it clarifies exactly what was said. There is a order in which members are to debate the motion. Number one, the member who made the motion is to speak first. Number two, a member who has not spoken a first time is to speak next. And number three, in preference, is, if possible, alternatives for and against. That's hard to do because usually when a person stands up to speak, you don't know if they're for it or against it. And there's really no way in most of the meetings that we go to answer it. Yes?
I've observed that a lot of times when somebody makes a motion, it is seconded, and then they vote yay or nay on this. So so usually it's discussed beforehand. They'll just start talking about something, and then somebody will move and then second it. And then where's the discussion from that point?
And that is a fantastic point, and you can see that that is not an organization that's following Robert's Rules of Order. What you mentioned happens all the time. People start talking about something during a meeting, and eventually somebody says, well, we're really not supposed to be talking about this because there's no motion. There's no motion on the floor. And so somebody will make a motion to describe what everybody's been talking about for the last 10 minutes, right? But that's an ineffective way of running a meeting, and it would be much better if the presiding officer or the chair were to tamp down on those kind of side discussions and say, if you want to speak, you must make a motion first and then speak. Because remember, if you make the motion, you get to speak first, right? Under the order of preference, all right? And so the solution to what you just described is the presiding officer taking a little bit more control of the organization, and that'll make it go more efficiently. Now, the next thing under item number 2 is the chair puts the question to a vote, right? If you have a motion, you ultimately need a vote, all right? And the question is on the adoption of. That's a lot of legal language. It's just simply sufficient for the chair, the presiding officer, to say, you know, the motion can now be voted on. And note you can have a voice vote. Those in favor of the motion say aye or say yes. Those opposed say no. Or you can have a rising vote. Those in favor of the motion will rise or stand. Or you can do raise your hand or lift a card. All right, and then be seated. That's important because you don't want to accidentally count people twice. And those opposed will rise or stand or lift a card up and then be seated. And then the third thing that needs to be done in considering the motion is the chair should announce the result of the vote. That way the members know if it passed or it failed. I have been to meetings where the results of the vote, the results of the election are never announced, and everybody's kind of left hanging as to whether or not it passed or it failed. And it gives here some legal language as far as the ayes have it and the motion is adopted or the motion is lost. I think for most of us, simply saying the motion passes or the motion fails is how we speak today. Yes, any questions on handling of a motion? You can make a motion for division, which is the Robert's Rules of Order parlance for saying we want something other than a voice vote. And any member can ask for a division. It's one of the absolute rights of being the member of an organization. And because the rationale, the thought of that is that in a voice vote, you will often have some people with louder voices, some people with softer voices. Some people may be just better at enunciating a no than their neighbor who may be enunciating a yes. And in voice votes, it can sometimes be difficult to determine what the will of the membership is. And you know, we always want to remember big picture. The big picture of Robert's Rules is to determine the will of the organization as a whole. So if you have a question or a concern about whether or not something actually passed, you can ask for a division. Now regarding specific the specific Senate rules. I believe in our Senate doesn't actually follow Robert's Rules of Order. I'm not absolutely confident about that one way or the other. I believe they have their own set of rules. But the in the political meetings that you go to, you can always ask for a standing vote or a division, which requires everybody to either stand or do something that is a little bit more objective. All right. All right. Now let's go to the next sheet, and the next sheet should look like a grid, and it's called Parliamentary Motions Guide, and this sheet is your friend. If you laminate this or you make copies of this and you bring it to your next meeting, this is actually very beneficial. The last time I've seen this sheet of paper show up at meetings, conventions, and other places, because it's essentially a one-page cheat sheet for 99% of what can happen. So the best way to go through this is let's just start at the very upper left-hand corner and get through these things as quickly as we can, and we'll ask questions at the end of each one of them so that you understand them. Okay? Now, let's look above the black bold, because this is very important, right? And this is on slide 1. It says the motions below are listed in order of precedence. Okay? That's very important. Do not lose sight of that. Okay? Any motion can be introduced if it is higher on the chart than the pending motion. All right? Because sometimes a lot of these meetings bog down into what do we do next? And what this chart lets you know is which motion trumps another motion. All right? So if you want to close a meeting, look at that. It's number 1 in priority. That's the first thing you should notice. If you want to close a meeting, you say, I move to adjourn. Can you interrupt? No. Now, interrupt means, can you speak while another member is speaking? Essentially, can you be rude? All right? Can you be rude? The answer is no. You have to wait till that person is done speaking. The second they're done speaking, you can say, I move to adjourn. All right? Does it have to be seconded? The answer is yes. Can it be debated? No. Right? This rule is violated all the time. A motion to adjourn is often debated. People start saying, do we really want to go? Isn't there more business? If the chair is running it, according to Robert's rules, the chair needs to say, a motion to adjourn is not debatable. Let's vote. All right? Debate means, can people talk about it? Okay? Can it be amended? The answer is no. And the vote is a simple majority vote. All right? Now, does anybody have any questions about how to close a meeting out that we just went over?
What if it's a minority vote? What if they don't have the majority?
Well, if they don't have it's a majority vote to pass. So if 55% vote to close the meeting is closed. All right? But if only 30% vote to close the meeting is not closed. All right? Does that answer that question?
Yes, sir.
All right. The next one down, number 20. And the number 20, those are the numbers that are in the actual Robert's Rules of Order, the official one, if you're wondering what those numbers mean. Number 20, if you want to take a break, I move to recess 4. All right? Now, that's not something we do a lot of, so I'm going to skip over that if everybody's permission. Okay? If you want to register a complaint, number 19, that's the third thing down. I rise to a question of privilege. All right? People often just yell out privilege, privilege. Now look, can you interrupt? Yes. Can you be rude? Yes. Do you have to wait for the person who's currently talking to continue talking? No. You can stand up and say, and these are the most common ones. People also say point of order is what I think we hear a lot of. Most don't we hear that point of order? Is what I hear most of the time. But you'll hear people say, I rise for a question of privilege. But you can interrupt. So the most common ones we see is somebody who's not a member starting to talk during the meeting. You can just simply say, Let's say, somebody from another county is showing up at your meeting. Somebody from your county is at the meeting and they just want to say something, all right? Because remember, these are meetings for the members, not the non-members. You can just simply say, point of order, arise for a privilege. This person who's talking is not a member, they are out of order, okay? Another example is, let's say you have a member who is speaking, but there's no motion on the table. That's another one I see a lot. Yeah, somebody will say, a point of order, there's no motion. Why are people talking? There's no motion. I think that's a very common one too. All right? All right. Does it have to be seconded? No. Okay? No. Is it debatable? No. You don't have to talk about it. The chair just makes a ruling. Can it be amended? No. And the vote is none. There is no vote. It's simply a ruling of the chair. The chair says, I'm sorry, you're not a member, you shouldn't be speaking. Or the chair says, I'm sorry, but there's no motion on the floor that we can't be discussing or debating anything. Do you have a motion to be made? In the situation where a person is speaking, but there's no motion on the floor, and somebody says, point of order, why is this person speaking? We're not discussing anything right now. The remedy is for that same person, the chair, to say, I'm sorry, there's no motion, you can't speak. The remedy is for that member to stand right back up and say, I rise to make a motion that we do this. At that point in time, if somebody seconds it, that person can then start talking. Because they've now made the motion, they have the highest priority of speaking. And that's the remedy, that's the simple solution to solve that problem. All right, the next item, the fourth thing down, is a motion to make us follow the agenda. I call for the orders of the day. That is something that, it's rarely done, but it should probably happen more often. Can you interrupt? The answer is yes, so you can be rude. And there's a reason why, right? If people are out of order and they're handling business in the wrong order, you have the right to immediately terminate it and bring it to an end. Does it need to be seconded? No. Is it debatable? No. Is it amendable? No. And is there any vote? No. It's simply the chair should rule that we need to get back and follow the agenda. All right? Now, the next one down is this is an important one, so we're going to focus on this. It says, if you want to lay aside temporarily, so if you want to put that motion off temporarily, you say, I move to lay the question on the table. All right? You don't have to use that fancy of a language. You just say, I move to table the motion, is what normally people would say. Can you interrupt? No. So you have to wait till the current person is done speaking. It has to be seconded. There is no debate. Now this seems kind of strange if you think about it. Because if you table something, it's done for the rest of the meeting, essentially. And under the rules, you're not supposed to discuss it anymore. Can it be amended? No, there's no reason to amend it, if you think about it. And it's a simple majority vote. So if you get a majority vote to table the matter, that motion for that meeting is done. But remember, we learned that at the next meeting, it is to be brought up without having to be put on the agenda. Okay? And that's the reason why it says debate no. Because essentially the way the thinking of the rules is that we're going to debate this at the next meeting. All right? Now, are there reasons to table? Let's talk about this one. Are there reasons to table a motion? Well, if you're in favor of a motion and you're looking around and your 5 best friends who think the same way you are not there and it's a close vote, may you want to table the motion until the next meeting when your 5 best friends who think just like you are thinking are going to be there? Well, absolutely, because you don't want it to lose, all right? On the other hand, if you think a motion is controversial, and this is the real reason why it happens a lot of times. If a motion is controversial, maybe you, as the presiding officer or one of the other officers, don't want the motion to pass. You will try to table the motion under the guise that we can talk about it later, but in reality, you're hoping it just goes away forever. All right? All right, so is there any questions about tabling something before we move on to the next item? All right, great. The next item down in priority, because remember these are all in priority, if you want to close debate, all right, then you say, I move the previous question, okay? Most of us here, I call the question, is what most of us here at our meetings here that we go to. I call the question. This happens all the time, so we need to understand what it does. It closes off debate, all right? Can you interrupt? No. So you have to wait till the person is done speaking. Now remember, when we say interrupt, do you have to wait till everybody is done speaking, or does that mean you only have to wait until the current person on the floor is done speaking? It's just the current person on the floor, okay? The minute they pause or hesitate, you can call the question. Does it have to be seconded? The answer is yes. Is there any debate? The answer is no. This is something that's violated all the time. People will call the question and they will say things such as, well, wait, I haven't done speaking, or I want to speak. Okay? Can it be amended? No, because it's so simple you would never need to amend it. All right, and the vote is 2/3. Now this is the first time we've hit a 2/3 supermajority requirement. Because remember what we are doing. We are closing the debate. Now, what we haven't talked about, that maybe you're confused, maybe you're not confused, is this. Robert's Rules assumes that everybody who has something to say can be heard. So if you have a large organization with hundreds of people, Robert's Rules assumes that the presiding officer will let every one of them speak. If that means all 200. That means literally all 200. And so, if you want, because you cannot vote, I'm going to say this so you understand. You're not supposed to vote till the last person's done speaking. Since that is ignored so often, we forget that's the rule. You're not supposed to vote until the last person is done speaking, and anybody who wants to speak a second time is done speaking, right? Because remember, under the priority of preferences, we talked about people voting, the person making the motion, and then people who haven't had an opportunity to speak, and then if somebody wants to get up and respond to somebody's, they have the right to respond a second time under the rules. So because of that, Robert's Rules creates a supermajority 2/3 vote to cut off debate. The rationale is if 2/3 of the people are tired or feel like there's been enough vote or communication on something, then that's good enough. All right? The reason why, and then it's the 2/3 vote, we've all been to meetings on numerous occasions where somebody calls the question and they just do it by a majority vote. Okay? It's not a majority vote. It is a 2/3 vote. Now, let's talk about it. Okay? Because here, very accomplished people who run this government will make this mistake numerous times at conventions and other places. Let's talk about this. So if somebody calls the question and it fails, let's say it only gets 55% of the vote, what happens? Yes?
I claim rise to question privilege.
Well, no, let's say things are going okay.
Okay.
Things are going okay, and there's a 55% vote to call the question. Do we all agree calling the question fails, right? You need to understand that. So since the motion was to close debate and it failed, what do we keep doing?
Debate.
We keep debating.
Okay.
That's right. We go back to the general rule that everybody gets to talk and talk a second time until they're all done talking. All right?
Misunderstood. I thought we.
Now, yep. And so we've got to remember if it fails. Now, if it passes, see, sometimes what you go to at a meeting, you call the question, it fails, and people think the chair will say the motion failed. I've actually seen this happen before. The motion failed. No, if the motion doesn't fail, the motion's never been voted on. All right? Now let's flip this around. What happens if you do get a 2/3 supermajority vote? Okay? Does that mean that the motion passed, the underlying motion passed? Absolutely not. To call the question just simply means I want silence. I want everybody to stop speaking. Doesn't mean anything more than that. But you have been to numerous meetings, and I have been there too, where somebody says to call the question, there's a vote, it passes, and then the chair declares the motion passes. And the next item on the agenda is then discussed. And often nobody in the meeting says, wait a minute, I only voted to get all my members to be quiet. I'm opposed to this, okay? So if the motion passes to end debate, the next thing that happens is an actual vote on the underlying motion. Never forget that. Never forget that. That is the next thing that happens. Okay? The next item down in priority is a motion to limit or extend debate. I move that debate, you say, I move that debate be limited to, okay? And this is situations, this will happen at all of our conventions. This will often happen to other meetings, all right? There's often a vote under the standing rules to limit debate to only 2 minutes. That's often what they put in there, okay? And now remember, if you limit debate, it requires a 2/3 majority vote. All right, a 2/3 majority vote. Often, what I see happening is that organizations will have a rule that they print that says debate is limited to 2 minutes, and you can only speak one time. Technically, if they want that rule to be passed, it requires a 2/3 vote to approve that. If only 55% vote to call the question, that means that debate will continue.
Okay.
Because you need 66% to stop debate.
That's what I understood. And for some reason, I got the impression that you went ahead and closed the debate. That's why I raised a question of privilege, because I would say at that point, we didn't get a 6%.
That's exactly the right thing to do. You understand it. That is exactly the right thing to do. That's right. Because you will see at meetings where it's only a majority vote, but not a supermajority vote, they will cut off debate. At that point in time, that's a great point. That's a perfect time for somebody to stand up and say a question of privilege or point of order. That didn't pass. That didn't pass. We need to keep debating. All right, so when we limit or extend debate, we see that it requires a 2/3 majority vote. We're going to move on to the next one so we get through most of these under our time limits here. The next one is to postpone to a certain time. That is something that's very rarely done. So that's essentially meaning I move that we don't consider the motion on the table. Instead, we all agree that we will handle it on September 1st, 2014. All right? We're going to move on because that's very rarely ever done. Refer to a committee. Okay? Now, this is something that is often done. It's often done to avoid the controversy that's currently being discussed. Somebody will stand and they want to refer it, so they'll say, I move to refer the motion to the Rules Committee. I move to refer the motion to the Resolutions Committee. Can you interrupt? No. Does it have to be seconded? Yes. Can that be debated? Absolutely, because if it is moved to a committee, the organization as a whole stops discussing it, don't they? And essentially they're going to allow a smaller committee, let's say of 5 people, to decide the matter for them. Can it be amended? Yes. So somebody makes a motion to refer to the Resolutions Committee. Somebody can stand and say, I amend that the motion be referred to the Resolutions Committee or Rules Committee, whichever one I said. The opposite of whatever one I just said, right? And it requires a simple majority vote. All right? It requires a simple majority vote. Next one down. If you want to modify the wording of a motion. Now this, since this happens every single meeting, let's make sure we all understand this. I move to amend the motion. Can you interrupt? No. Does it need to be seconded? Yes. So in our motion, we said before, I move that the political party spend $500 for advertising to promote the party. Okay. Somebody can say, I move to amend the dollar amount to increase it to $1,000. Does everybody understand our example? Okay, that's the amendment. I move it to be 1,000 instead of 500. Do you have to have one person agree? Yes, it has to be seconded. Can you debate that? Absolutely yes. Now when an amendment is made, that is now what you debate. You are no longer debating the underlying motion. People will lose track of this constantly. You'll go to meetings and the chairman or the presiding officer will be discussing the underlying motion. That is improper. As soon as an amendment is made, you are to only discuss the amendment. Can an amendment be amended? The answer is yes. All right. And so let's think of an example of that would be, I move to amend the $1,000 to 1,000 Canadian dollars. All right? So as soon as that amendment is made, you are to you are no longer debating the spending of the money. You're no longer talking about the $1,000. You are simply to discuss whether or not it should be in Canadian dollars. All right? When people are completely done talking about the Canadian dollars, that is when you call the vote. Or somebody calls the question. That requires 2/3 though. You would then vote on Canadian dollars versus US dollars. Let's assume that passes. At that point in time, you then go back and handle the next motion, which is the amendment, and then you would now debate the $1,000 versus $500. Make sure you do it in that order. Okay? Then when everybody's done talking about $500 versus $1,000, then you can have a vote, or somebody calls the questions after 2/3. You can shut debate off early at 2/3. Then you vote on the $1,000. So let's assume that passes. Now you go back to the underlying motion, because now the motion is, I move to spend 1,000 Canadian dollars for advertising to promote the Republican Party. All right? Then you debate that. And remember, now you're debating the motion as it currently is, the 1,000 Canadian dollars, not the 500 US dollars. All right? And then people will vote either yes or they will vote no. And it will either pass or it will fail by a simple majority vote. Okay? Any questions about amendments? Any questions about amendments and the proper procedures? And the key thing is you understand it's like stacking think of it as stacking pieces of paper. All right? The last motion that was made, the last amendment was made, is the one you got to handle. As soon as you're done with that, you look at the next piece of paper. As soon as you're done with that, you can vote on the next piece of paper. Don't ever try and vote on the underlying paper until the top piece of paper is taken care of. The next item is to kill a main motion, and the wording is, I move that the motion be postponed indefinitely. This is slightly different than tabling, and it's slightly different than voting no. Remember, if you table a motion, what happens to it at the next meeting? Automatically is brought up, okay? If a motion is voted on and denied, or it fails, what happens to that motion? It's dead, right? It's dead, all right? Now, this is somewhere in between. I just move that it be postponed indefinitely, all right? We rarely see this, so let's skip this. All right, next item, the very bottom item on here is, if you want to bring business before an assembly, you bring your motion. We're back to where we started here, as far as when we dealt with the basics of a motion. Now, let's say you say, I move that. Can you interrupt? No. You have to wait your turn. It has to be seconded? Yes. Can it be debated? Yes. We've talked about that. Can it be amended? Yes. Can it be amended a second time? Yes. Can it be amended a third? Can an amendment be amended? Absolutely yes. And it's a simple majority vote. Now, when you look at this chart, one of the things that should strike you is that the motion is the lowest priority. The motion is of the lowest priority. But that makes sense if you think about it. Because how can you amend something that doesn't exist? How can you table something that doesn't exist? How can you cut off debate on something that doesn't exist? But the motion is of the lowest priority. Anything else that somebody wants to do with that takes precedence, trumps anything else. All right? Is there any questions about these priority of items before we flip over to the other side? Okay? All right, now we're going to go over to side 2, and we have these incidental motions. There's no order of precedence. They arise incidentally, and they are decided immediately. These are essentially a whole lot of things that you can do that fall under, I rise for a question of privilege, all right? The first one is to enforce rules, a point of order. In my mind, the way we do these things, that's the same thing as rising for a question of privilege. I mean, because that's, if you take a look at it, if you want to register a complaint, you rise for a question of privilege. As far as how we see meetings being run, saying a point of order is essentially the same thing. Can you interrupt? Yes. It doesn't have to be seconded. It doesn't have to be debated. There's no amendments and there's no vote. The chair just makes a ruling. All right? Now, we're just going to go through the rest of these because these really don't come up much. You want to submit a member to an assembly. Well, you want to suspend a rule. Let's talk about that because that came up here. If you want to suspend a rule, what are our rules? Our rules are the things on the first side. Majority votes, 2/3 votes, stuff like that. If you want to suspend a rule, you say, I move to suspend the rules. You can't interrupt. Has to be seconded. Can't be debated. Can't be debated. All right? Can't be amended. And it requires a 2/3 vote. The rationale for the 2/3 vote, of course, is that since you are taking away the rights of somebody else, all right, you should at least have to get 2/3 of the people to agree with you. What are some of the rules that we see suspended? And that's a great question. And some of the ones that I would like other people to chime in here if they can think of ones where rules got suspended. But the ones I see is allowing non-members to speak during the meetings. That's a rule that's often suspended. It's often a rule that's just simply not enforced, and so it has the effect of suspending it. Probably some of the other good examples is most organizations have bylaws or rules as to how meetings are to be conducted. And there may be a rule, for example, that you cannot spend money without, you can't spend any money without it being discussed at two different meetings. So for example, a motion would need to be brought at the first meeting, and then under the party rules, you couldn't actually vote on it until the next meeting. And you'll have situations where somebody will say, I move to suspend the rules, all right? And that would require a 2/3 vote, because maybe you have a situation where that money needs to be spent right now. And the rationale is that if 2/3 of the people agree, then that's what the organization should do, all right? So I think that's an example of a rule that's often suspended, is a rule that builds in some kind of a time delay. All right, the other ones that are mentioned on here is if you want to avoid the main motion altogether, all right? And that's, you essentially object to the consideration of the question. We don't really see that a lot. All right, the next thing on the items is an appeal, to appeal the decision of the chair. And what that does is it takes the decision away from the chair and it puts the decision back in the hands of the assembly. Often this is used when the body, the assembly, the organization disagrees with a ruling of the chair. The most common example is when the chair announces the results of an election, a motion, and if the chair says, for example, the ayes have it, and you think that the noes had it, your remedy is to call to appeal the decision of the chair. Okay? And when that happens, the chair, if he or she is following the rules, is to stop the meeting and allow another vote to determine whether or not the chair's decision is correct. Another example of that often comes out is a chairman will often rule something out of order. Okay? And maybe say it's not germane or it can't happen, and you think that chairman didn't follow the rules. Or another example where it happens is when somebody calls the question, and there's a vote on calling the question, and that passes, and then the chair says the motion is hereby passed. Remember, that's a motion, a vote on calling the question isn't a vote on the underlying motion. The motion has not yet passed, all right? So your remedy is to stand up and say, I appeal the decision of the chair. And at that point in time, the chairman is to turn the decision over to the assembly as a whole for another vote on the matter. All right, the next thing on the agenda, or on the list, is a motion to divide the motion. And it's, I move to divide the question is what you say. What this is when you have two things in one motion, and you want to separate the two things in the one motion. So for example, if you wanted to say, I move that we spend $500 on advertising on television to promote the party, and $700 for a print campaign. And what this is saying is that the members have a member has a right to stand up and say, I move to divide the motion. Because isn't that really handling two totally different things? You're spending $500 on television, and you're spending $600 or $700 on a print campaign. Well, there may be some members, including yourself, who agree with one part of that, but not the other part. Or maybe you think the combined effect of that is too much money, and so you want one or the other. So you move to divide the motion. You can interrupt. You cannot interrupt. It has to be seconded. It is not debatable. It can be amended, all right, and it requires a majority vote. So if that passes, then what that would do is you take the one motion and split it into two separate motions requiring two separate votes. All right? So why would you want to do this? Once you agree, it would be a situation where you agree with essentially half you agree with half of the motion, but not necessarily the other half.
Would the original motion where you spent 500 on television be divided by saying, I want to divide how much we're going to spend and how much and where we're going to spend it?
That might be an amendment. A division is essentially taking the two parts, one part and splitting it into two parts. And so I think your motion would be, I move to divide the question so that we vote on, we vote separately on the $500 for the television campaign and have a separate vote for the $600 for the newspaper. At that point in time, if that passes, it's two separate motions, and then those motions could each be amended further. You could increase the dollar amount, you could specify what television channel that you were going to advertise on. All right. The next thing on the agenda is if you want to demand a rising vote, which sounds very much like a divided motion, but you say, I call for division. And that's a very fancy way of just simply saying, you want either, saying, I call for division is a fancy way of just simply saying, I want either a standing vote, or I want people to raise hands, I want people to raise their placards, to do whatever summarily done. Can you interrupt? Now think about it. The answer is yes. You can be rude. Isn't that, when can we be rude? We can be rude when things are important. You take a look at your other side. Examples where you can interrupt. I call for a matter of question. Your rights are being violated. A question of privilege. I stick with the agenda. You can be rude. Okay? A demand that you stand or raise your hands is considered very important, so they allow you to be rude. Does it have to be seconded? No. What is this? That tells us that the Roberts Rules views this as so important that if you are the only person in the room who believes this, you have the organization to follow. Right? I mean, if there's a group of 200 people and one person wants a division, that one person can force it. How rare is that under the rules? All right? You can't even debate it. It's considered so important. All right? Can it be amended? The answer is no. It's so important to amend it. And do you get a vote on it? The answer is no. It is so important, you can't debate it, you can't change it, and it automatically happens. All right? It automatically happens. Because when it says vote no, it means that if one person asks for division, the chair must divide the group. All right? The next ones, is there any questions about demanding a right to calling for division? And I think it's important to talk about, because often when we come to meetings, there are questions as to whether or not a motion actually passed, because people are rowdy, they're yelling, they're screaming, right? And they're, and a person will ask for division, and it will often work. You may go to conventions, and people will ask for division, and the call for division is ignored. Now, under Robert's Rules, which most of our organizations follow, and the chairman ignore one person out of 1,000 asking for no. Remember, one person can call for it. There's not debatable. It's not seconded. There's no vote. It automatically happens. All right. The other things on the list are parliamentary law questions. That's a member asking about something we've talked about today. I don't think I've ever seen it ever happen, except in points of order. And then a request for more information. Essentially, that's a member saying, I would like to know from member so-and-so whether or not this is true or not true. A good example of that may be asking the treasurer how much money is in the bank account before voting on spending $500 for a television ad campaign, right? All right. All right, now, the next group of items are motions that bring a question again before the assembly. And there's no order here. You introduce only when nothing else is pending, meaning there's no motions on the floor. All right? The first one is to take a matter from the table. Okay? Now, I move to take from the table. Now, I'm understanding this correctly, this is at the same meeting. So, a motion is made, the motion is tabled by a majority, let's take a look. It's a majority vote, there's been no debate, and at the same meeting, you want to take the motion off the table and bring it back up, instead of having to wait till the next meeting. You can't interrupt, it requires a second, there's no debate, there's no amending, it's simply majority vote. All right? So if something, now why would you do this? Well, remember, you may want to table a motion if your 5 best friends who think just like you aren't at the meeting. And a vote is about to happen, and you think you're 3 votes short. Well, now your 5 friends who think just like you have shown up at the meeting because they got stuck in traffic and they're coming back in. And now you say, I move to take the item off of the table. Does everybody understand that? Okay? The next one is cancel a previous action. Okay, I move to rescind. All right. And then the next one is to reconsider a motion. I move to reconsider the vote. Let's talk about that. And I'm going to have to wrap my brains about this, and a lot of this has to depend on whether or not it's the same meeting or the next meeting. So let's go through this. I move to rescind. So that would be at the meeting last week, we voted to spend $500 on a television campaign, and it passed. I move to rescind that motion that happened last week. All right? Well, because don't you want to have that ability to do that? Right? I mean, just because a motion's passed doesn't mean it has to last forever. And it doesn't mean that you can't cancel it before it happens. So if you want to do that, can you interrupt? No. Does that have to be seconded? Yes. Is there debate? Well, yes, you're going to debate this. All right. Can you amend it? The answer is yes. And the vote is 2/3 majority with prior notice. So you're protecting the interests of the people who were at the previous meeting who voted in favor of the motion. I mean, because if you think through this, the group has already decided that they want to spend $500 on television, right? The people who wanted that to happen, are they not happy? Oh, of course they are. Maybe they don't show up for the next meeting because they got what they wanted. Isn't that something that happens a lot? The people got exactly what they wanted, so they're not going to show up to any more meetings. So the rules say that if you want to undo something that's already happened, you have to do it with notice. The notice just simply means the postcard, a letter goes out that says we are going to vote again to rescind something that already passed. Now that's slightly different than the next item. To reconsider a motion, I'm thinking off the top of my head here, I believe that is at the same meeting. That's the difference here. So if you're trying to think what's the difference, it's whether or not you're doing it at the same meeting or the next meeting. I move to reconsider the vote. So, today, we voted to spend $500 on a television advertising campaign. An hour has gone by, and you're thinking, I'm having second thoughts here. You can move to reconsider the vote. Can you interrupt? No, you gotta wait your turn. Does it require a second? Yes. Debate. The debate varies because you can't, I'm going to try and do this off the top of my head. We're going to get technical here, and I'm going to get lost. There's all sorts of rules about you can't bring the motion unless you voted in favor of it the first time. So essentially think of it as a sore loser law. If you're on the losing end of the motion, you can't be the person who is now taking the same position. Or let's put it another way, let's make it simple. You have to change your mind. You have to have changed your mind, and now you are advocating the opposite position. Okay? There's no sore, it's a anti-sore loser law. You can't just keep bringing the same thing up again over and over again. Okay? At the same meeting. All right? Can you amend it? No, there's nothing to amend, right? Because If you think about it, what are you gonna amend? You're asking to essentially do a second vote on the exact same item, are you not? Right? So there's nothing to amend, you're either going to, there's no reason to amend, and it requires, now look at this though, here you only have a majority vote to undo it. Now that's different than if you close the meeting and you try and do it the next day, right? Does everybody catch that? So, and doesn't that make sense? Because if everybody is in the same room, and everybody, and enough people change their mind, shouldn't the organization be able to change their mind right away?
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, that just makes common sense. Just because you do something, you're not stuck with it for the rest of your life. You're certainly not stuck with it because, it's only been 10 minutes, all right? When this would happen has to be fairly rare. You probably have to have some person walk in the door and say, we have no money in our bank account, so we don't have $500 to spend anymore. And everybody says, oh, we gotta change our mind. Okay? All right, that gets us through our motions guide. This motions guide is your friend. You should keep it, laminate it, and keep it. Before we move on to the strategies, is there any questions about any of these items?
I have a quick question. The number 34, where you say I moved to take from the table, that would have to be the same person who tabled it to begin with?
No, it could be any member could ask that the item be taken off of the table. Okay? But remember, that's always going to be at the same meeting.
Right.
Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Because at the next meeting, it automatically comes back up. You don't have to do anything. All right? Are there any other questions about stuff? Yes?
What happens if, the last, consider the motion?
Number 37,
What would come next?
well, if you reconsider the motion, so
On the next meeting, I'm sorry.
well, okay, so let's get through this. So a motion is made and it passes. During that same meeting, somebody would say the words, I move to reconsider the vote. Remember, it can only come from somebody who has changed their mind. That's important. Okay? I move to reconsider the vote. And you're saying if it passes, then that has the effect of negating the original motion. It's like advanced math when we have a 1 plus a negative 1 equals a 0. They just nullify each other out. It's as if it never happened. All right? Good question. Is there anything else? Yes.
What about as the chair? Can that be asked?
Can the chair ask to reconsider a motion?
Yes.
Good question. Chairs aren't supposed to be doing much talking. Okay? Under Robert's rules, the chair is not to be making motions. The chair is the best example of a chair is a baseball umpire. Okay? The baseball umpire is simply there to watch the pitcher and the batter and just calls balls and calls strikes. All right? He's not supposed to be there, he or she is not supposed to be there to make sure one side wins or loses. The chair doesn't even have a vote in most situations.
If there's a tie?
There's a tie, the chairman has a vote in most situations.
Right.
All right, we're moving on to the next item, which is parliamentary strategy. This is going to help us wrap our brains around what we want to do to be successful. It's the last page that we're going to deal with. Now, it's broken down in two different sides. If you want to help a motion, or if you want to help adopt a motion, or if you want to help defeat a motion. All right? So let's look at item number 1, and then we'll see the corresponding item number 1. We should propose a well-conceived motion in good language. The opposite of that is propose in hastily written or ill-conceived language. We see this all the time where motions fail because people don't actually understand what the purpose of the motion is. All right. Number 2, you can, if you want to help it, adopt it, you second the motion. Number 2, the opposite is you do not second the motion. Number 3, we speak in favor of the motion, or we can speak against the motion. Number 4, we vote for the motion, or we vote against the motion. These are fairly basic, and now we're going to start getting a little bit more inside baseball. Number 5, Vote against any motion to postpone indefinitely. We're gonna skip that because that rarely happens. Number 6, we can amend to perfect or improve a motion if you want. If you realize that, hey, people are gonna support this motion if we just clarify a part of it, or people will support this motion if we add on a whole nother item. All right? Now, number 6, to defeat it, we can amend to encumber or complicate the motion. Now, these are called poison pills. This happens down in the General Assembly on a regular basis, where good legislation with a lot of broad support is coming up before the organization, the Assembly, and somebody puts in a poison pill to try and kill it, knowing that if this one item is added on to this 1,000-page document, that 80% of the people will change their mind and now vote against it. Okay? Because you got to remember the purpose there is to kill the entire bill, to kill the entire motion by changing one thing. All right? Number 7, okay, you can vote against any motion to refer it to act on now. So if somebody brings up a motion to table, but you want to handle today, you vote against that motion to table. Number 8, vote against any motion to postpone. Number 9, vote against the previous question to allow debate. Or number 9, you move the previous question before debate is completed. So let's follow through with that. Let's say a lot of people still want to discuss the issue, and you want to defeat the motion, so you can move to call the question. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to stop 20 people talking in favor of it. Because sometimes these motions build momentum, and person after person after person speaks in favor of them, and then the group says, oh, it's a great idea. All right? So if you sense that's happening, you call the question before any momentum is built. Number 10, you can move to recess if you need more votes. Number 11, if adopted, vote against their motion to reconsider. We talked about motions to reconsider, right? If defeated, you move to reconsider. Now, here's the tricky one. Number 12, on the other side. If defeated, vote against their motion to reconsider. Now, you will have people, there are times when you will see people voting against something that they're in favor of, so that they can be the person to ask that it be reconsidered at a later date. Because since you can't vote for something and then have it defeated, you can't, you remember there's no sour grape, there's an anti-sour grapes rules here. You can't just keep bringing it back up. But if you vote for it when you're really against it, you can ask for it to be reconsidered at a later date. Number 13, vote against any motion to adjourn. These are things we do to help a motion. Number 14, at a subsequent meeting, there we go, we're confirming is at a subsequent meeting, vote against any motion to rescind. All right, and then number 15 states something that is very obvious. Only votes win. Get your votes to the meeting. At the end of the day, if you show up with more people than the other side, you can stop any efforts to amend, you can stop any efforts to table, you can stop any efforts to put in poison pills. At the end of the day, if you show up with more votes than the other side, you will win. All right, before we wrap up this meeting, are there any questions about any of these parliamentary strategies? Sure.
I was a little confused about 9.
Vote, now, when they say vote against the previous question, that is when somebody calls the question, is what we call it here in South Carolina. So, if you want to help the motion, usually you want to allow debate to continue, but this is assuming that the debate is going your way. And that you have people who are going to speak in favor of it. It doesn't say that, but that's the only way it would make sense. Because what you may be thinking is, wow, they've got 5 people here who are about to speak against something I support. You would want to call the question at that point in time and say, you know, everybody seems to be in favor of this. I'm calling the question to end debate, knowing full well that the next 5 speakers are all going to be against you. All right. So that number 9 just doesn't give you enough information to really tell you where you're at. All right. Is there any other questions about parliamentary strategy before we wrap the meeting up? All right. Well, thank you. I've had the pleasure of being here, and I hope that one of my goals is met, and that is at your next meeting, you feel more comfortable and more confident that you're doing the right thing by making the motion or bringing out a point of order if the rules aren't being followed. So thank you for being here, and good night and good day.